With the exception of perhaps the Bible, there have been no literary works as culturally influential on the development of the Western canon as the Iliad and the Odyssey. The poems of the nebulously attested to Homer have been told and retold since time immemorial, fragments lost, preserved and reinvented many times over. From the works of Athenian playwrights such as Euripides and Aeschylus, to the romantics of the high medieval era, to the great thinkers and philosophers of the Renaissance and modern writers, the story of the Great War fought outside the walls of Troy and its aftermath have never lost its relevance in Western civilization. Today, in this special long-form video, we at Wizards and Warriors will be walking down this path well tread, providing our own take on the complete stories of Achilles, Hector, Odysseus, Agamemnon, Helen, Cassandra, Clytemnestra, and every other tragic hero whose stories remain seared into the public consciousness even today. Welcome to our video on the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the epic cycle of Homer at large. The immortal tale of war told in the Iliad did not begin with a grand political dispute, but with a wedding. This was the matrimonial ceremony of King Peleus of Phthia in Thessaly and the sea nymph Thetis. Peleus was a famous warrior leading a group of elite super soldiers who used to be ants called myrmidons. Thetis was the daughter of the wise old deity of the sea, Nereus, and was sought after by all the gods for her beauty. However, upon hearing that she would produce a son who would be more powerful than the father who would sire him, Zeus decided to avoid the risk of taking Thetis as a mistress. Instead, he married Thetis and Peleus together, so that the eventual son would only be stronger than a mortal human. Peleus acquired the bride which had been promised to him through a tactic common in Greek mythology: kidnapping. This was achieved through the straightforward method of physically overpowering her. Thetis tried to escape by turning into various animals using her nymph powers of shapeshifting, but Peleus managed to hold on to her and bring her to his palace. It was this wedding which sparked a most inopportune incident that would cause destruction to myriads of Trojans and Hellenes. Almost all the Greek gods were in attendance and brought epic gifts. Poseidon, for instance, brought the two immortal horses, Balius and Xanthus, to Peleus, while Zeus brought a pair of wings of the defeated Titaness Arche to Thetis. The couple of Hephaestus and Aphrodite brought a knife and a bowl with the image of Eros, respectively. However, one goddess was not invited, much to her chagrin. That was the goddess of discord, Eris, who was determined to make a mess of the wedding. She took with her a golden apple and snuck into the wedding. As everyone was busy socializing and eating their souvlaki with tzatziki, she threw the apple onto the table. On the apple was inscribed a phrase: "To the fairest." The apple's scandalous presence immediately caused a fight amongst all the goddesses in attendance over to whom it was meant for. After much debating, there remained only 3 female deities left in contention for fruity accolade: Athena, the goddess of wisdom, Hera, the queen of the gods, and Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty. In order to break this deadlock, the trio turned to Zeus to make a judgment as to who ought to receive the apple. Zeus, however, was not in the mood to ruin his relationship with 2 of the 3 goddesses. Thus, he decided to pick a more neutral judge. To that end, he became fixated on a shepherd in Asia Minor, Paris, known for his impartiality. Paris was the son of King Priam of Troy and Queen Hecuba. Before his birth, his mother had seen a dream of a torch coming out of her and burning the city. The seer she asked about this troubling vision proclaimed that this vision was an omen that her son would bring about the destruction of Troy. Consequently, Paris was abandoned as an infant and left to die in the wilderness. After being raised by a bear mother, he was reared by the regretful shepherd who had been ordered to abandon him. Eventually, and after many childhood adventures involving the outwitting of thieves, he became known as a local notable. One day, as he was performing his bucolic tasks, the three goddesses appeared before him on the orders of Zeus. After explaining the task at hand, the three goddesses offered him some gifts to sweeten the deal. Hera told Paris that he would become king of Asia if he chose her, while Athena promised to make him a supreme military commander. Aphrodite, for her part, simply told him that she would provide him with the most beautiful woman in the world, the daughter of Zeus, known as Helen. Despite already being in a relationship with a nymph named Oenone, who had promised to heal all of his wounds, Paris opted for Aphrodite's option and gave her the apple. This act made him an enemy of Athena and Hera, and would prove devastating for Troy. Herein we could ask a valid question. Why did Zeus choose Paris to be the arbitrator of this fatal beauty pageant? Some myths claim that Zeus set up Paris for failure, for he considered mortal kind to be overpopulated at the time, and that a war between Greece and Troy would reduce the human population. Paris himself went to Troy proper and participated in a boxing contest, defeating all of Priam's other sons. Upon seeing the man's skill, Priam realized that this was his long-lost child. Thus, Paris reconciled with his royal family and assumed the title of Prince of Troy alongside his many siblings. But the prophecy of his birth would soon rear its ugly head upon all the peoples of his city. After reuniting with his family in Troy, Paris embarked on a journey to find Helen, the wife that had been promised to him. There was just one obstacle to his task: the fact that Helen was already married to the king of Sparta, Menelaus. The young and careless Trojan prince did not see this matrimony as an issue, and with Aphrodite's help sought to either win Helen's heart or take her by force. The way he achieved this labor differs depending on the source one uses. Some ancient lawkeepers claim that Paris went on a diplomatic mission to Sparta, and was thus welcomed as an honored guest by Menelaus. There, Aphrodite either helped Paris kidnap Helen, or made Helen fall in love with Paris and join him willingly. Others say that Paris organized a raid, went to Sparta and kidnapped Helen. A third version of the myth claims that Helen never went to Troy. Instead, Hera sent Hermes to kidnap the young queen, and sent a copy of her made from clouds to Troy with Paris. The real Helen would then spend the next decades in exile in Egypt, while everyone fought and blamed her for the bloodshed. Regardless of the myth, Menelaus raged and called upon his brother Agamemnon. Agamemnon was the king of Mycenae, which had been founded by the hero Perseus, and was the most powerful Greek ruler at the time. Agamemnon invoked a treaty that all Greek kings had signed. Among the stipulations of the treaty was an agreement that if Helen was kidnapped, all the kings had to join in an expedition to save her. Such a grand concordat was signed because all these kings sought Helen as their wife, and Menelaus wanted an insurance policy in case his marriage to her was questioned. Of all the champions who fought in the Trojan War, the most mighty and famous was by far the son of Thetis and Peleus, known as Achilles. To understand why Achilles was so important to this war, we must understand his youth. Achilles was born in Phthia, where his kingly father planned to give him a royal upbringing. His mother, however, had reasons to fear a life of war for Achilles. Thetis had been told a prophecy that her son would either live an uneventful life or become a hero who would die young but whose songs would be sung for an eternity. Like any mother, she could not bear the latter scenario, and thus performed magical rites to make her son immortal. The first of these rites involved taking the infant to the river Styx, whose waters bestowed those who bathed in them with invulnerability. The baby Achilles was given his super bath, his entire body submerged beneath the current, except for one of his heels, which Thetis used to hold him under the water. Next, Thetis fed her son the food and drink of the gods, ambrosia and nectar. after which she held him over a fire to burn away the remnants of his mortal flesh. Thetis did all this in secret from her husband, whom she considered too mortal to understand the benefits of her rituals. One night, Peleus walked in on Thetis holding baby Achilles over the fire. Not knowing what was happening, Peleus went into a rage and attacked his wife. Thetis escaped and returned to her father, Nereus. The process of Achilles' immortalization was incomplete, but had nevertheless left Achilles with invincibility in all of his body, except for his heel. The young prince of Phthia was sent to the care of the wise centaur Chiron for his education, alongside Patroclus, a nobleman from Thessaly who would become his best friend and lover. Achilles grew into a fierce man, demonstrating both superhuman capabilities and a remarkable aptitude for the arts and sciences of war. However, he was also impatient and temperamental, a trait he inherited from both of his parents. When the preparations for the Trojan War began, Agamemnon sent messengers all over Hellas to call upon would-be heroes to the expedition. Thetis contacted Peleus and told him of the prophecy she had heard before their son was born, and she knew that if Achilles went to Troy, he would die. Peleus did not want his son to die young, and organized a scheme with his wife to save their beloved child. They sent their offspring to the island of Scyros, to King Lycomedes. There, Achilles was disguised as a girl and hidden in the court. While there, he fell in love with a princess named Didamia, with whom he had a son named Neoptolemus. The Greeks, however, were adamant in their need for Achilles, because a seer named Calchas had foretold that only his presence would ensure a Hellenic victory. Thus, Agamemnon sent Odysseus, the cunning king of Ithaca, to find the invincible hero. The ingenious Ithacian quickly discerned that Achilles was in Scyros, and so went to the court of Lycomedes. There, while the court was lounging, Odysseus threw a collection of weapons on the ground. Upon seeing the arms and armor, the war nerd inside Achilles awakened, and he jumped to grab the weapons, revealing his identity. His parents begged Achilles not to go, but the young man angrily rebuked them. When faced with the choice between a martially glorious yet short life and a domestically inglorious yet long one, he chose the former and set off for the Greek camp. The Greeks congregated in the port of Aulida, in the Greek region of Chalkida, and it was a sight to behold. 1,000 ships washed upon Chalkid's shores, with the most famous kings of all of Hellas riding their prows. Among this royal company was Nestor, the wise and old king of Peleon, as were heroes like Diomedes of Argos, Ajax of Locros, and Ajax of Salamis. Twice the Greek fleet attempted to put out to sea, but twice they failed. The first time they sailed off course and washed up in the region of Mysia in Asia Minor. The Greeks foolishly thought they had reached Troy, and initiated a raid of the local Mysian kingdom. In the ensuing fight, Achilles injured a local king named Telephos. The wound would not close, and Telephos heard a prophecy that said only he who had injured him could heal him. The Greeks left, but a magical storm pushed them back to Mysia. There, upon the advice of Odysseus, Achilles cured Telephos by touching him with the spear that had injured him. Following this humiliating misadventure, the Greeks dispersed and returned to their respective kingdoms. 8 years later, they returned to Aulida, but this time there was no wind to push the ships to Troy. No one knew why this was the case until they consulted with an oracle. What was revealed shocked Agamemnon most of all. He had been cursed by the goddess of the hunt, Artemis. In his hubris, Agamemnon had claimed to be a better hunter than Artemis herself, and had killed a stag sacred to her. The vengeful goddess demanded a bloody tribute to allow them passage. She wanted Agamemnon to kill his daughter, Iphigenia, as a sacrifice to her. Agamemnon did not want to murder his own daughter, but was under severe pressure from all the Greeks to honor the concordat and go to Troy. He thus lied to his family that Iphigenia was to be wed to Achilles, and that she had to come to Aulida at once. Iphigenia's mother and Helen's sister, Clytemnestra, came to see the wedding. However, upon arriving, they discovered the horrible truth. Clytemnestra was furious with her husband and refused to let the sacrifice take place. In addition, Agamemnon had not consulted with Achilles about this ruse. Once the hero heard about his name being used for murderous trickery, he also flew into a fit of rage. Achilles stormed to the tent where Iphigenia was being kept and swore to protect her honor. The young princess, however, saw that the Greeks were about to murder each other for her name and could not bear it. Thus, she agreed to be sacrificed. Iphigenia was led to an altar and lay down upon it. The sacrificer sharpened his dagger, lifted it, and struck. Smoke filled the site, and once it settled, the Greeks discovered a stag had been sacrificed at the altar. Iphigenia, unbeknownst to all, had been saved. Artemis herself had intervened and had snatched the princess from the jaws of Thanatos. She took Iphigenia to her temple at Taurida in modern-day Crimea, where she became her priestess. The Greeks witnessed the wind fill their sails, and thus began their voyage across the Aegean Sea. Clytemnestra, for her part, returned to Mycenae, plotting revenge on her husband. For the time being, however, the Greeks were focused on getting to Troy. Little did they know that the war would last a decade, and that many would take even longer to return home, due to their deeds inside the city and on the way back. Before they reached the city, the Greeks passed through the island of Tenedos. There, Achilles got into a fight with Tenes, the son of Apollo, killing the demigod in a brawl. This murder put the son of Thetis in the crosshairs of the sun god. As they made their final approach upon Troy, a diplomatic mission composed of Odysseus and the hero Palamedes approached the city's walls, offering the Trojans the opportunity to surrender Helen without a fight, so as to avoid bloodshed. Naturally, Paris refused, and so the Greek envoys returned empty-handed and ready for war. Meanwhile, the Trojans called upon their many allies from Thrace, Asia Minor, and even the lands of the Amazons for combat. The Trojan War was about to begin. The Trojans were waiting for them on the beach. As the prows of their triremes pulled up upon the sand, none of the Hellenes wanted to jump down. This was because the oracle accompanying the Greeks, Calchas, had foretold that whoever landed first on Trojan soil would be the first of the Greeks to die. Odysseus managed to game the system by throwing his shield down and landing on it as opposed to the soil itself. The king of Ithaca was followed by the leader of the Phyllicians, Protesilaus, who died on the spot, slain by Hector, the prince of Troy. Moments later, Achilles leapt over the gunwale of his trireme and faced his first enemy, a warrior named Caicnos, who was immune to any damage from bronze weapons, a conundrum Achilles solved by simply throwing a rock at the man's head, instantly killing him. The initial battle on the beach was won by the Greeks, who succeeded in pushing the Trojans behind the walls of the city of Troy. These walls were formidable, having been built by two Greek gods, Apollo and Poseidon, as part of a punishment imposed on them by Zeus for trying to overthrow him. As a result, the walls were more or less impregnable by mortal armies. Consequently, the siege of Troy stretched out over 9 long years. Unable to break into Troy proper, the Hellenes spent their gaps between each siege season raiding nearby cities who were allied to and supplying the Trojans. The demigod Achilles was particularly unhinged in his land piracy operations, sacking about 11 cities in 9 years. It is the 10th and final year of the war whose records, ostensibly authored by the poet Homer, have survived into the modern era in its complete form. The trouble began when the Greeks raided a neighboring city of Troy and captured the daughter of the local priest of Apollo. The woman, who was called Chrysis, was given as a concubine to the leader of the Greeks, Agamemnon. The priest begged for his daughter's release, but was rebuked by the mighty Hellene. Thus, he called upon his master, Apollo, who had sided with the Trojans. the god took his magical poisoned arrows and began to shoot at the Greeks, causing a mass plague in their beach camp. With his army being culled by sickness, Agamemnon relented and gave his concubine back to her father, but demanded that another woman must take her place. He thus stole the concubine of Achilles, Briseis of Lyrnessos. Achilles naturally was enraged, withdrawing from the war and locking himself up in his tent alongside his friend and lover Patroclus. The Greeks were thus left without their greatest champion, and to make things worse, Achilles' mother, Thetis, begged Zeus to help the Trojans so that the Greeks would realize how vital her son was. Acquiescing to the nymph, Zeus sent a dream in which he influenced Agamemnon into launching a massive and disastrous attack on Troy. The Hellenic king awoke prepared for this task, but first wanted to test whether the Greeks were mentally prepared for the battle to come. To that end, he convened the Greek troops and told them that they were to go home. He thought that the troops would be aghast at abandoning 10 years of battle in a fit of cowardice, for it was the Bronze Age, and military glory was key to a man's honor. However, the exhausted Greeks instead erupted into cheers, elated to be returning to their families. Agamemnon then revealed the ruse and forced them back into battle while chastising them for being cowardly. Meanwhile, in Troy, the royal family convinced the cowardly Paris to end the war by challenging Menelaus to a one-on-one duel to decide Helen's fate. Thereafter, they arranged for the duel with the Greeks, who gleefully agreed to avoid further bloodshed. Menelaus and Paris met and began their fight, their bronze weapons clashing mightily like lightning upon the earth. The heroic Menelaus managed to defeat the Trojan, and was about to strike the finishing blow when the goddess Aphrodite intervened, seizing her favorite mortal and whisking him back to Troy. The Greeks cried foul and immediately attempted to initiate a battle, culminating in the ultimate success of Zeus's plan. Athena led the Greeks, while her brother Ares fought with the Trojans. Many heroes appeared on both sides, including Prince Hector of Troy and his brother Paris. It was then that the Greek hero Diomedes achieved his first major feat of glory. As a proto-gamer, he used the cheat code known as Athena's aim assist and threw his javelin at Ares. Athena guided the projectile towards Ares, who was struck and forced to retreat in humiliation. The battle continued, with Diomedes racking up the highest kill count of all, before facing down possibly one of his most formidable enemies, the grandson of the hero Bellerophon, Glaucus. The two faced each other in battle, until they realized that Diomedes' father, Oeneus, had been a guest of Glaucus's father. As hospitality was sacred in the ancient Greek world, the two exchanged gifts and parted ways as friends. As the battle raged on, the gods retreated upon the order of Zeus, who wished the war to unfold as the fates intended. Meanwhile, Hector challenged Diomedes to a duel. Their spears and swords then interlocked for a whole day until nightfall, with each of the two heroes showing their utmost mastery of the art of war. When the battle ended, the two armies collected their dead and cremated them in accordance with proper rites. The next day saw another battle, with the Trojans emerging with the upper hand. When the sun dusked once more, the Greeks sent Odysseus and Ajax of Telamon as emissaries to Achilles to entice him to return. Agamemnon even promised to return Briseis and bequeath him with many luxurious gifts besides. But Achilles was unrepentant and sent the emissaries away, claiming he would only rejoin the war if Hector made it to the Greek ships and burned them. Unsure of what to do, Menelaus and Agamemnon asked the wise King Nestor for advice on how to proceed, and were told to send spies to the Trojan camp. Diomedes and Odysseus were chosen and were dispatched to find the camp. They first bumped into Nolan, a spy sent to the Greeks by Hector, interrogated him for information, and then killed him. The stealthy duo then located the camp of the most important allies of the Trojans, the Thracians, and massacred all of them under the lunar light. Thus, the Trojans were left without support when the day dawned once more. The Greeks launched another attack with Agamemnon as their leader, who distinguished himself by slaying many noble Trojans and chasing them to the walls of the city. But the people of Troy still had noble Hector on their side. The heroic prince led a massive counterattack, injuring Agamemnon, Diomedes, and other Greek kings. Riding their momentum, the Trojans fought back the Greeks all the way to their camp walls, with Hector and his comrade Sarpedon breaking through the wooden palisades with stones. They plunged towards the ships to burn them. The Greek gods, who were aligned with the Achaeans, scrambled to let Zeus help them, but the father of the gods continued in his prohibition. Hera, however, was not going to let him get away with it. She stole Aphrodite's belt that contained her love potions and drugged Zeus, who chased after her. He was then driven to sleep through the help of the sleep god, Hypnos. The pro-Greek Olympians then sought to help the Hellenes. Poseidon disguised himself as the Greek seer Calchas and rallied the Greeks, who began to fight back. In the meantime, the wise King Nestor asked Patroclus to take Achilles' armor and pretend to be the grand hero. Patroclus acquiesced and went to ask his companion for his weapons. Achilles, though still angry, agreed but ordered him to only save the Greek ships and not go beyond the walls. As all these chaotic conflicts were unfolding, Zeus awoke and angrily sent Iris to chase Poseidon away from the Greek camp. This left the Greeks on their own, with Ajax of Telamon to fight off the Trojans. It was at that moment that Patroclus thundered into the battlefield, dressed in Achilles' armor. Believing the most powerful Greek hero alive was coming at them, the terrified Trojans broke ranks and fled. It was then that Hector was informed by Apollo that the man in armor was in fact Patroclus, and turned to face him. Man and god attacked Patroclus as one, swiftly cutting him down and taking his armor. The Greeks ran to save the body of the young man, with Menelaus achieving the glory of retrieving it. Achilles was informed of the death of his friend and lover, and felt a pain stronger than the weight of the sky being forced down upon the Titan Atlas. Weeping and wrathful, he leapt from his tent and let out a terrifying scream that shook the Trojan army to its core. In order to exact his vengeance, he asked his mother Thetis for new armor, and like any Greek mother, she immediately dashed to help her beloved son, ordering a new set of bronze plate from Hephaestus, the smith god, who forged it with the most illustrious materials. Later that day, Achilles re-entered the battlefield. The gods of Olympus picked their sides, rallying with either the Greeks or the Trojans. Achilles was fearless, nearly killing Aphrodite's Trojan son, Aeneas, and chasing Hector around the battlefield in his frothing need for revenge. His merciless massacre caused the river Scamander to become clogged from the number of corpses that fell in it, which enraged its god. Achilles and Scamander nearly came to blows, but Athena stepped in to de-escalate the feud so that Achilles could continue on his killing spree. The son of Thetis' murderous rampage continued until he had cornered Hector right outside the walls of Troy. With the thought of defending his fatherland in his mind, Hector made the decision to stop running and to stand and fight. The two warriors finally clashed their swords outside Troy's walls, and despite Apollo's attempts to help Hector, Zeus chased him away to let the battle unfold. Finally, Achilles gained the upper hand and cut Hector down brutally. He then took the man's body and dragged it around the walls of Troy with his chariot, in a terrifying display of cruelty and disrespect. Hector's family, from his parents, Priam and Hecuba, to his wife Andromache, all wept at the terrifying sight. Hector's body was taken to the Greek camp by Achilles, and funerary games were held for Patroclus so that his soul might rest at last. Not wishing to let Hector's body stay rotten and defiled, Zeus sent Thetis to Achilles to tell him to release the corpse, and sent Iris to Priam to give him gifts to buy back the body of the noble prince. Under cover of darkness, Priam snuck through the Greek camp and entered into Achilles' tent, begging him for the body of his firstborn son. Upon recognizing something of his own father in the elderly Trojan king, Achilles acquiesced and gave him the body. Priam took his son back to Troy, where he was buried with the highest royal honours. After this event, the Iliad ends as a poem, but we have fragments of what happened until the sack of the city. At some point, Achilles was fighting outside the Trojan walls when he was spotted by Apollo and Paris. Taking fateful aim, they shot a poisoned arrow together, which hit Achilles in his weak heel. The hero died on the spot, fighting in battle as had been his wish, his soul departing to the fields of Elysium. Paris also died in battle not long after, at the hands of Heracles' friend, Philoctetes. The Greeks held a contest over who would take the arms of Achilles, and Odysseus won, to the dismay of Ajax of Telamon. The hero protested, but eventually committed suicide, after being tricked by Odysseus' patron Athena into attacking a flock of sheep to embarrass him in front of his comrades as a manic fool. After the death of Achilles, the Greeks were desperate to end their 10-year siege of Troy and finally take the city. One step they took to achieving this goal was bringing Achilles' son, Neoptolemus, to fight. Neoptolemus had been very young when his father left for Troy, but after Achilles' death, prophecies claimed that his son had to be present for the sack to succeed. The second step, and eventual solution, came from the cunning Odysseus. He proposed building a wooden horse, supposedly as a gift to the goddess Athena, and to feign retreat. The Trojans awoke one day to find no Greek ships and the giant horse on the shore. They decided to take the horse inside the city. Having seen the ruse for what it was, the prophetic Trojan priest attempted to prevent this, but Poseidon sent serpents to kill him and his sons, and so the Trojans took the horse in. Princess Cassandra, who had been given the gift of prophecy by her suitor, Apollo, screamed that the horse was to be their doom. But she was cursed by Apollo after rebuking him to not be believed by anyone, and thus the Trojans ignored her. When night fell, the Greeks burst out and initiated the most famous sacking of a city in the entirety of the Western literary canon. Helen was captured and given back to Menelaus, who would have killed her if not for her beauty. Priam was murdered beneath the sacred grove of Zeus when he tried to defend his son Polites from Neoptolemus, while Hecuba was either stoned to death or taken as a slave. Polyxena was imprisoned by Agamemnon, and Andromache was given as a slave to Neoptolemus, but not before seeing her son thrown off the walls of Troy. All the other Trojan royals, like Prince Deiphobus, were killed as well, except for the youngest prince, Polydoros, who had been sent to Thrace years prior. Cassandra tried to hide in a temple of Athena, but was brutalized inside the temple and given as a slave to Agamemnon. Such horror did the sack produce that even the gods who had allied with the Greeks were horrified. Only 2 families survived. One was that of the hero Antenor, who had tried to hand Helen over before the sack. The other was the son of Aphrodite, Aeneas, who was granted courtesy by the Greeks for carrying his elderly father and statues of their ancestors away from the fires of the sack. He would embark on a journey that would last years, and eventually found the eternal city of Rome, avenging the sack by having his descendants conquer Hellas. The Trojan War was over. The famed city of Ilium, with walls built by Olympian gods, was now in ashes. Its people had been murdered, and its temples desecrated, and the Hellenes were now on their way home, triumphant and victorious. Many heroes had perished in this conflict. Hector, Achilles, Paris, and Ajax. Many of the survivors believed that after 10 years of brutal conflict, they could finally live in peace. But it was not to be. The Trojan survivors would suffer under Greek slavery, or wander for years until they reached Rome. The Greeks, who had defiled many a temple, would now face the wrath of the Olympians who now despised them, both on voyage and at home. The first tragic tale to be told in the wake of Troy's fall is that of Agamemnon, his family, and the prophetess Cassandra. After his triumph across the Aegean, Agamemnon returned to his seat of power in the kingdom of Mycenae, where he was met with simmering resentment from his wife. Clytemnestra had never forgiven Agamemnon for sacrificing their daughter Iphigenia to Artemis to generate the winds necessary to blow his ships across the water to Troy. She cheated on her husband with his rival and cousin Aegisthus, and when Agamemnon returned, she conspired to kill him. Thus began the Oresteia, a trilogy of tragedies written by Aeschylus, an Athenian playwright and veteran of the Persian Wars. Upon arriving in Mycenae, Agamemnon boasted of his exploits and of the vengeance he had wrought upon Troy, showing off Princess Cassandra as part of his spoils. As we mentioned in our previous episode, Cassandra possessed the gift of prophecy, thanks to her suitor, the god Apollo. But after she rejected the sun god, Apollo cursed her so that none would ever believe her auguries. Clytemnestra pretended to welcome the duo to Mycenae, and told Agamemnon that she had prepared a bath for him. Cassandra began to scream upon realizing the omens of doom before her, but because of her curse and his arrogance, Agamemnon dismissed her. The two were led inside by Clytemnestra. Agamemnon went to the shower, where Aegisthus suddenly appeared with an axe and struck him twice in the head to kill him. Clytemnestra murdered poor Cassandra as well. Thereafter, she and Aegisthus ruled Mycenae as tyrants. There was, however, one small problem. That was Orestes, the son of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra. Before he could be killed, Orestes was helped out of the city by his sister, Electra, and sent to Phocis. When Orestes came of age, he travelled to Argos to pay respects to his father's remains, and then went to Mycenae alongside his cousin Pylades and his sister Electra, where the cheating duo was running the show with an iron fist. Upon arriving in his ancestral homeland, Orestes pretended to be a foreigner seeking sacred hospitality, and proclaimed that Orestes was, in fact, dead. Clytemnestra and Aegisthus led the disguised Orestes through the palace as hosts. Once within the royal halls, Orestes drew forth his sword and attacked the couple, killing them in the process. Justice had been served, Orestes claimed, but there was a price. To murder one's own mother in ancient Greece, as in most societies, was considered a dreadful act by the gods. So it was that the three demonic women, known as the Furies, descended from the immortal realm to punish Orestes for his misdeeds. These monsters terrorized and plagued Orestes, with the young man only surviving due to the help of the god Apollo. Orestes fled to Athens to seek redemption. There, the goddess Athena intervened to help him, establishing the historical Athenian justice system as a byproduct of her involvement. She organized a divine trial in the Areopagus, where the famous courts of ancient Athens would stand in future eons. A fierce trial ensued, with Apollo defending Orestes and the Furies serving as prosecutors before a jury of Athena and 12 Athenians. Eventually, when the jury voted on whether Orestes should be killed, they were tied. Athena broke the tie by voting in favor of Orestes, who was spared. The Furies were transformed into the Eumenides, or the Kindly Ones, spirits of justice and proper procedure of justice. Now that we have seen the fate of Agamemnon, let us move on to the end of his brother, Menelaus, and his recently recaptured wife, Helen. There are multiple versions of the myth of their return to Sparta. The two most famous ones both concern Egypt. In one version of the myth, Helen and Menelaus were just nearing their homeland of Laconia, when the gods sent down a storm which blew them off course to the land of the Nile. There they languished for years, constantly attempting to sail home, but constantly being blown back by storms. Eventually, the couple began to ask around about what to do. They found a young nymph named Idothea, who told them that her father was a seer who could help them. The problem was that her father was Proteus, a half-fish, half-human deity known for his powers of transformation. Proteus would not simply answer questions if asked by mortals, and would only do so if someone managed to capture him and keep him imprisoned. Idothea, who sympathized with the plight of the stranded Spartans, took Menelaus and his 3 best soldiers to a cave and hid them inside the skins of seals. Not long after, Proteus emerged alongside the rest of the pack of seals and proceeded to do his favourite hobby, counting the sea mammals. Upon finishing, he went to sleep, whereupon Menelaus and his soldiers jumped upon him. Proteus transformed into multiple creatures and elements to escape: lion, snake, leopard, boar, water, and even a tree. But Menelaus kept the fish man under a solid wrangle, and eventually Proteus relented. The wise god informed Menelaus that he had not sacrificed to the gods before his journey home, displeasing them, a shortcoming he must remedy now. Menelaus also asked and was informed about the death of his brother, as well as the fates of his comrades. Upon doing the sacrifices and erecting a cenotaph to Agamemnon, he sailed towards Sparta on open waters and under calm skies, returning home after 18 years. The other myth outlining the conclusion of Menelaus' tale is linked to the version of the story that says that Helen never went to Troy, an alternative canon to the Trojan War promoted by ancient Greek chroniclers like Herodotus. Rather, she was a loyal wife who was kidnapped by Hermes on the orders of Hera, who wanted Troy to be destroyed in revenge against Paris, who had chosen Aphrodite's gifts over her own. In her place, an eidolon, or cloud copy, was left to be kidnapped and go to Troy. Upon her abduction, Helen was shipped off to Egypt, where she became a guest of the local king, also named Proteus. After Proteus died, his son, Theoclymenos, expressed his wish to marry Helen, but she rebuked him. Fearing Theoclymenos' wrath, she sought sanctuary in Proteus' tomb. Theoclymenos' sister, Theonoia, told her not to despair, for her husband Menelaus had departed from Troy and would meet her soon. It was at that moment that Menelaus became stranded in Egypt. Theoclymenos had, by that time, initiated a manhunt for any Greek in Egypt, and thus Menelaus hid in a cave with his companions and Cloud Helen. One day, as he was out seeking a means of escape, he went to the tomb of Proteus, and was shocked to see the real Helen there. The eidolon ascended to the heavens in that moment, confirming that Helen was innocent of the accusation that she was unfaithful. The problem remained, however. Theoclymenos would kill Menelaus if he found out that he was in Egypt. Thus, the dynamic duo concocted a ruse. Menelaus appeared as a poor messenger, announcing his own death, and Helen pretended to weep. She begged Theoclymenos to let her throw her husband's supposed ashes to the sea, to which he triumphantly acquiesced to get onto Helen's good graces before marrying her. Helen took the ship the pharaoh had provided her and proceeded to use it to escape with Menelaus and his comrades. So it was that Menelaus and Helen returned to Sparta, where they lived a happy life until the end of their days. Another Homeric character whose story concluded after the Trojan War was Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles. Before returning to Greece, Neoptolemus and all the other Greeks were said to have found themselves in Thrace, where the Greek ships were all stuck due to a lack of wind after the end of the Trojan War. There, the ghost of Achilles appeared to the stranded Greeks and informed them that they must sacrifice one of their royal captives, the Trojan princess Polyxena, as payment to the gods to secure their return home. Neoptolemus demanded that the deed be done. This is how the tragedy Hecuba, by the Athenian playwright Euripides, begins. In this story, Hecuba, the queen of Troy, had not yet been killed during the sack of the city, but was given as a prisoner to Odysseus, who had yet to start his famous Odyssey. Despite the bonds of her enslavement, Hecuba had managed to protect her daughter Polyxena by hiding her in her tent. She begged Polyxena to stay with her, but the princess instead chose to sacrifice herself. Neoptolemus decapitated Polyxena to please his father, breaking the queen's heart. Hecuba then went to the shore and discovered that her youngest son Polydoros, who had been sent to Thrace for protection, had been killed by that country's king, Polymestor. She and her servants decided to take revenge. They invited Polymestor to Hecuba's tent as an honored guest. There, they seized him and brutally blinded him. The Greeks stoned Hecuba for this act, but the gods took pity on her. The queen had lost all her children to the war, and thus was turned into a dog to avoid the same fate. Neoptolemus continued on to his hometown of Phthia in Thessaly. With him was Andromache, the wife of the slain Trojan prince Hector, who was now his slave. He had at least one son with her, named Menelaus, who would found the royal dynasty of the ancient Greek kingdom of Epirus. However, Neoptolemus only had Andromache as his concubine, taking Hermione, the daughter of Menelaus, as his proper wife. Hermione was very jealous and disrespectful towards Andromache, attempting to kill her and her son. This is the setting for the plot of the titular tragic play Andromache, also by Euripides. Fearing for her life at the hands of Hermione, Andromache went to the temple of Apollo to seek sanctuary, where she encountered Menelaus, who was there visiting his daughter. Menelaus was no more friendly to Andromache than his daughter, threatening to kill her son Menelaus himself. Thankfully for Andromache, Neoptolemus's grandfather, the former king Peleus, appeared and proclaimed that Andromache was to be protected. Menelaus eventually left Phthia, which made Hermione fear that if Andromache told Neoptolemus about the bullying the Spartan princess inflicted upon her, he would kill her. Thankfully for Hermione, but unfortunately for everyone else, it was at that time that she was visited by Orestes, who had once been her lover and suitor. Hermione told Orestes of the situation, and he decided to challenge Neoptolemus to mortal combat. The duel ended in the death of Neoptolemus, breaking his grandfather Peleus' heart. The tragedy was only resolved when Thetis appeared, who told her former husband to bury their grandson at Delphi. Andromache was given as wife to the last surviving Trojan prince, Alenos. Together they went to Epirus and founded New Troy, meeting their compatriot Aeneas on his way to found the eternal city of Rome. Now we will look at what exactly happened to some of the minor heroes of the Trojan War. The most interesting case is that of Prince Teucros of Salamis, who was the brother of Ajax the Greater. As we might recall from our previous installment, Ajax had committed suicide after being driven mad by Athena, who wished her favourite, Odysseus, to receive the arms of the dead Achilles over Ajax. Teucros was a distinguished archer, the finest of all the Hellenes in this art, but no act of valour could protect him from the shame of his brother's fate. When Teucros returned to Salamis, he faced the wrath of his father, Telamon, who asked him why he did not manage to save his brother from death. Unable to answer, Teucros was exiled from Salamis and began to wander through Greece in search of a new home. He went to the Oracle of Delphi, where Apollo told him to go east to the island of Cyprus. Teucros began his journey, stopping in Egypt along the way, where some tales claim he met the exiled Helen just before she escaped Theoclymenos, unaware of who she was. Teucros moved on and eventually reached Cyprus. There, where the Greek and the Phoenician worlds met, he married the daughter of the local king. That woman was called Eune, and together she and Teucros had a daughter named Asteria. Teucros also founded a city on the east coast of the island named Salamis, in memory of his homeland. Many Cypriot, and especially Salaminian kings, claimed descent from Teucros for centuries afterwards. There is also the tragedy of Ajax the Lesser, a rather brutal and unscrupulous hero. Unlike the honourable yet tragic Ajax the Greater, this Ajax was an arrogant and bloodthirsty man who got exactly what he deserved. Ajax the Lesser had served with the Greeks in Troy, but he committed many atrocities. In our previous installment, we mentioned that he entered the temple of Athena and brutalized Cassandra before the statue of the goddess. The Greeks tried to stone him to death for his sacrilege, but Ajax survived by seeking sanctuary in Athena's temple. But Athena would not so easily forget his crimes. When Ajax boarded his ships to go home after the war's conclusion, the goddess of wisdom asked Zeus to bring forth a storm that destroyed all of their boats. Ajax caught himself on a rock and weathered the storm, yelling to the sky that he would survive despite the Olympians' will. Poseidon silenced him with a cure to arrogance known as death, sending a wave that destroyed the rock and drowned him. There is also the tale of what happened to Diomedes. This hero managed to return home unscathed, due to being the least bloodthirsty of all the Greeks, not committing any atrocities or sacrilege that might prompt the gods to sabotage his homeward journey. However, there was the issue of Palamedes, a man killed by Odysseus. In one particular version of his myth, Palamedes had been drowned while fishing by both Odysseus and Diomedes in revenge for Palamedes tricking Odysseus into joining the Trojan War. Palamedes' brother, Oyax, was angry about the murder, and upon returning to Greece began to spread rumours about many of the Greek kings. He went to Argos and told Aigiale, Diomedes' wife, that her husband was cheating on her to get back at him. Aphrodite also aided in this mischief, because Diomedes had injured her and her son Aeneas during the Trojan War. As vengeance for her husband's supposed infidelity, Aigiale took many men as suitors and took control over Argos, banning Diomedes from entering. The Argives chased the hero in order to kill him for his cheating, but he survived by hiding in the Temple of Hera. At night, he snuck out when everyone was asleep and ran away. Diomedes went to Italy, where he encountered Daunus, king of the Daunians near Apulia, in the southern part of the peninsula. Diomedes helped the king win against his enemies, the Messapians, and married his daughter. From there, Diomedes founded many prosperous cities in southern Italy, and was remembered there as an almost godlike figure. Odysseus was born in Ithaca to King Laertes, and descended from the messenger of the gods, Hermes. This lineage gave Odysseus both the gift of adventurism and wit, along with the privilege of a royal upbringing. When he was young, Odysseus went on a hunt to Mount Parnassus, where the Titans had once fought the Olympians. There, he faced a boar who injured him, leaving him with a scar on his knee. Later in his youth, Odysseus travelled to Messenia and met a prince named Iphitus, with whom he became friends. The prince presented Odysseus with a bow that his family had been gifted by Apollo. After these adventures, Odysseus tried to find himself a suitable wife. He first tried, like all Greek noblemen, to marry Helen of Troy, but when she chose Menelaus instead, he realized that there was a high risk of a dissatisfied suitor starting a war over her. To avoid this eventuality, he made all the Greeks swear that if Helen was kidnapped, they would all rise up to fight for her and her husband Menelaus. This is why, when Helen was kidnapped by Paris, all the Hellenes joined the king of Sparta in the war to bring her back. In his continued search for a wife, Odysseus traveled to Icarius, the kingdom of Helen's uncle, Tyndareus, with whom Odysseus requested his daughter's hand in marriage. In order to decide which of his daughter's many suitors to give her to, Icarius set up a foot race, which Odysseus easily won. In so doing, he acquired the hand of the young princess known as Penelope. Together, Odysseus and Penelope had a son named Telemachus. When the time came for the Trojan War, Odysseus tried to pretend he was an insane farmer to avoid the conflict. But his rival, the Euboean prince Palamedes, placed his son Telemachus in front of Odysseus's plough, forcing him to stop and reveal that he was sane enough not to run his son over. Thus, Odysseus set off for Troy, fatefully embarking on a journey that would see him embroiled in 10 years of war, followed by a 10-year journey to return home. All the while, his wife, Penelope, remained behind in Ithaca, forced to endure as her royal household was invaded by aristocratic suitors who made themselves at home in her home and sought to win her hand in marriage following her husband's absence. It is the 10-year journey after the Trojan War that forms the central story arc of the sequel to Homer's Iliad, the Odyssey. After leaving the city of Troy, Odysseus reached the island of the Lotus Eaters. The native species of magical lotuses, which grew on the island, possessed mind-bending properties which sedated those who ate them, as well as making them forget their past. Some of Odysseus's sailors were unwise enough to imbibe the lotus and had to be dragged away in their hippie stupor. The next stop of Odysseus's crew was, unbeknownst to them, an island full of the one-eyed giant sons of Poseidon, the Cyclopes. Venturing deeper into the unfamiliar isle, Odysseus and his men explored a cave, where they were discovered by the sheep-herding Cyclops Polyphemus. the horrifying giant immediately seized the crew and began devouring all of Odysseus's companions, forcing the king of Ithaca to quickly figure out a means of escape. He approached Polyphemus to plead for mercy and hospitality, introducing himself as nobody and giving the Cyclops undiluted wine. Drinking himself into a stupor, the massive Cyclops fell into a deep, inebriated slumber. Having incapacitated his opponent, Odysseus then snuck up on the monster with a fiery wooden nail and drove it into his one eye, blinding him. Polyphemus cried for help, blaming nobody for his misfortune, to which his fellow Cyclopes only laughed. Through this trick of wordplay, Odysseus had ensured his deed would remain anonymous. Now that the Cyclops could not see them, the Greeks hid under the bellies of Polyphemus's giant sheep to escape the cave. However, Odysseus was arrogant and wanted it known that he was the one who defeated a Cyclops. Thus, he foolishly mocked Polyphemus and revealed his name. Polyphemus begged his father Poseidon to curse Odysseus, something his aquatic father would oblige many times over throughout the rest of Odysseus's journey. Odysseus's next stop was the island of the wind god Aulis, who welcomed him with the honor of a regal guest. Aulis locked all winds in a bag so that they would not disturb the Greeks on their way home, except for the western wind, Zephyros, who was told to guide the Ithacan ships back home. It seemed that all was going well until just before they reached Ithaca. There, some of the companions convinced themselves that the bag of wind had gold in it and opened it. The winds were unleashed, and the Greeks were torpedoed back to Aulis's island. Seeing as they had disobeyed his one command to not open the bag of winds, Aulis refused to help them again and sent them off, proclaiming that Odysseus and his crew were cursed with bad luck. After that misfortune, Odysseus passed by the cannibal island of the Laestrygonians, where the man-eating giants catapulted stones onto the ships, destroying all of them except for the one Odysseus was on. Terrified and demoralized, the Ithacans sailed around until reaching the island of Aiaia. Some of Odysseus's companions went off to find food, and found a large estate where there lived a few women under the leadership of a sorceress named Circe. The witch welcomed the guests and fed them lots of food. Then, out of nowhere, she struck them with a wand and turned them into pigs. Upon realizing that his companions had gone missing, Odysseus set off to find them. On the way, Hermes appeared before him, warning him about Circe. The messenger god provided Odysseus with a herb that debuffed Circe's magic, after which the emboldened Odysseus went into the palace. Circe welcomed the king of Ithaca, treating him to a lavish meal. But when she tried to hex him, Odysseus leapt forth and overpowered her. Having put the witch at his mercy, Odysseus ordered her to free his companions, to which Circe complied, turning them back into humans. The Greeks then spent a year in rest and relaxation with Circe, unafraid of further transformations, since they knew how to defeat her. But they soon grew homesick and asked Circe how to go back. Circe sent them off to the sunset, where they reached the edge of the earth. The witch had instructed Odysseus to go westward, because that was where the gates of Hades were, and only they could tell him how to reach home. Odysseus did a sacrificial ritual in front of the gates of Hades to summon the shades. The dead came forth, amongst them many of his old comrades like Patroclus and Achilles. But the most shocking appearance was that of Odysseus's mother, Anticlea, who informed him that his household had been occupied by aristocratic homewreckers. Odysseus was given instructions on how to return to his homeland, and then sailed back to Circe for more provisions. There, he collected supplies and set off with his companions. Odysseus now had clear instructions on how to return home to Ithaca, but also a difficult journey ahead. The first stop on the path set out before him was the island of the Sirens, women-headed birds who sang magical songs and lured men to crash upon the rocks and be eaten by the monsters. Odysseus managed to escape this eventuality by putting beeswax in everyone's ears to block out the sound. Only he was tied to a mast and allowed himself to be entranced by the song to further his own knowledge and curiosity. Leaving the enchanted island behind, the Greeks reached the crossing between Scylla, a multi-headed woman monster, and the water cyclone of Charybdis. The two beasts immediately attacked the ship as it arrived through their pass and started seizing the crew one by one. The Greeks rowed their boat as quickly as they could, while Scylla and Charybdis attacked them. Eventually, they passed through, though many noble Hellenes ended up dying at the hands of the beasts. Finally, they stopped at the island of the sun god Helios, Thrinacia. There, they encountered the deity's sacred cows, and Odysseus forbade everyone from eating them. He did this because Circe had warned him that Helios would destroy them if they did. Sadly, some of his companions succumbed to their hunger and had themselves a sacred barbecue. Upon learning of this outrage, Helios beseeched Zeus to punish the Greeks. Consequently, the king of the gods sent a giant storm that wrecked the ship. Only Odysseus survived, and was cast off to the island of Aegea. There, he became the prisoner of the Titan Atlas's daughter, Calypso, and stayed with her for 7 years. After these years passed, the Olympians met on Mount Olympus to discuss what to do with Odysseus. Ever hoping to protect her favorite mortal, Athena successfully convinced her father Zeus that it was time to let Odysseus return to Ithaca. We may remember that Poseidon was angry at Odysseus for blinding his Cyclopean son, but he was away in Ethiopia on a feast at the time and could not argue his case. Thereafter, Athena shapeshifted into an old friend of Odysseus and went to Ithaca, where she was welcomed by an unknowing Telemachus. She discussed the state of the palace with the young prince, who was angry at how the suitors were trashing it and attempting to strong-arm his mother Penelope into marrying one of them. Penelope had managed to avoid marriage so far by telling them that she would only wed when she was done weaving the shroud of her father-in-law, Laertes. Little did anyone know that she was destroying the shroud she made every night to stall their efforts. Telemachus was instructed by the incognito Athena to go and ask Odysseus's friends around Greece for his whereabouts. The young man did so, but neither the wise king Nestor of Pylos nor Menelaus and Helen of Sparta knew where he was. The suitors, in the meantime, began to conspire to murder Telemachus to prevent him from reuniting with his father. Meanwhile, Zeus sent off Hermes to meet with Odysseus in Calypso's abode. The speedy divine messenger arrived with a message from the king of the gods. Odysseus could leave Aegea, and Calypso was to give him the means to do so. Calypso herself was smitten with Odysseus and initially refused to let him go. But one could not deny the will of Zeus for long, so she eventually acquiesced. She prepared a boat for Odysseus and gave him all the provisions needed to travel back to Ithaca. Odysseus set off the next day, but unfortunately for him, Poseidon was returning home from Ethiopia and saw the enemy of his son Polyphemus daring to cross his domain. The sea god summoned a wrathful storm that devastated Odysseus's boat. Odysseus was submerged into the Mediterranean and was only saved because of the magnanimity of the minor sea goddess Leucothea, who arose from the sea and gave him a magic handkerchief that saved him from being drowned. When the storm passed, Odysseus washed up on the island of Scheria, where he wandered off to find signs of life. He eventually bumped into the princess of the isle, Nausicaa of the Phaeacians. The hospitable princess took Odysseus to the palace, where he was welcomed by her father, the noble king Alcinous. The Phaeacians threw a feast for the guest, despite not knowing who he was. Soon after, the king noticed that the stranger always burst into tears whenever Troy was mentioned. Upon being asked why, Odysseus revealed himself to be the king of Ithaca. He sat and narrated his travels to the Phaeacians, from Troy to their island. When Odysseus finished his story, all the Phaeacians applauded him. Alcinous provided him with many rich spoils and an escort of ships to bear him home. Odysseus finally made it to Ithaca after 20 years. As for the Phaeacian escorts, they tragically encountered Poseidon on their way back. Upon realizing that they had helped Odysseus, the god of the seas unleashed a storm that killed the noble Phaeacians in an act of unjust cruelty. Finally back on the shores of his homeland, Odysseus had begun to scout when the goddess Athena revealed herself to him. She explained the situation in the palace and disguised him as a beggar so as to protect him from the suitors. Odysseus went to the house of his loyal shepherd, Eumaeus, and listened to the old man wax lyrical about how the kingdom had been destroyed in his absence, with Penelope under threat and Odysseus's father Laertes now a poor shepherd like himself. It was at that moment that Telemachus returned with gifts from mainland Greece, as well as a seer named Theoclymenos, who had requested to join the prince so that he could serve in a royal household. Father and son came to recognize each other slowly, and a heart-warming reunion ensued. Promising to help his father, Telemachus set off for the palace by taking a route that avoided an ambush that the suitors had set for him. The suitors were dumbfounded when they saw him. Telemachus dismissed the suitors' threats, for the seer Theoclymenos had foretold their doom, and told his mother that their family's suffering would soon end. Odysseus arrived in the palace that very night, coming upon his dog, Argos. The good boy had been patiently waiting for his master for 20 years, covered in ticks and neglected by the suitors. The old dog recognized his master and barked at him in joy before drawing his last breath. Barely holding back tears, Odysseus went into the palace. There, he saw the suitors partying hard. Upon laying sights on the ostensible, mangy beggar, the suitors began to mock him for his supposed poverty. The posh buffoons even forced Odysseus and another beggar of the palace, Iros, to perform a boxing match, which Odysseus won easily. It was then that Penelope appeared, and chastised the suitors for their behavior towards the beggars. As the verbal altercation took place, Telemachus prepared the ground for his father's vengeance by removing all weapons from the banquet hall. Penelope ordered the servant Euryclea to wash the new beggar's feet as she conversed with him. The queen of Ithaca then proclaimed that she was tired of the abuse and would probably remarry to satisfy the suitors so they would cease their reckless rampaging through her family's halls. In that moment, Euryclea spotted Odysseus's knee scar and instantly recognized him. But the hero instructed her to be quiet before telling Penelope that she should only marry someone who could perform a martial challenge worthy of her old husband. Penelope agreed to such a contest, hoping for the best, as Odysseus prepared for the challenge ahead that would prove the instrument of his vengeance. The next day saw Penelope announce the challenge to the suitors. Her husband would be whoever could stretch the Apollo-powered bow of Odysseus and shoot it through 12 axes. Telemachus attempted to make the shot first, and almost succeeded, but Odysseus stopped him, for the suitors would kill the prince if he showed such gallantry. Theoclymenos warned the suitors that their final day was at hand, but they drunkenly disregarded the seer. In their clumsiness, each suitor tried their luck with the bow, but none was able to pull back the mighty bowstring. It was at this critical juncture that Eumaeus and Telemachus closed the doors and shooed Penelope away for protection. Odysseus requested that he try his hand with the bow, prompting the suitors to start laughing and mocking him. Odysseus was eventually allowed to take the bow. With incredible ease, he shot the arrow through 12 axes before the bewildered suitors. As thunder roared in the sky on the orders of Zeus, Telemachus, Eumaeus, the loyal cowherd Philoetius, and Odysseus proceeded to murder the suitors for daring to trespass and harass the royal household and its inhabitants. No one was spared. In an act of cruelty, even the mistresses who served in the palace and the shepherds who worked with the suitors were murdered. When all was done, all the dead lay before a victorious Odysseus. Odysseus ritually cleansed the palace from the impurity of the bloodbath and met with Penelope. Penelope did not think that her husband had returned, so she tried to test him. She instructed Eurycleia to move the royal bed to the bedchamber. Odysseus responded by proclaiming this wasn't possible, for the bed had been carved out of the tree branch next to the palace. Realizing that the man before her was indeed her husband, Penelope rushed to embrace him. The couple spent the night telling each other the stories of their adventures. The next day, Odysseus met with his father and had a tearful reunion with him. There was another issue to be resolved, however. The aristocratic relatives of the suitors had heard of their murder and rushed to kill Odysseus. Before more blood could be spilled, however, Athena appeared and proclaimed that it was Zeus's will that the conflict would end. Thus, the nobles retreated, and Odysseus retook his throne as king of Ithaca. Despite the end of the Odyssey, Odysseus had many more adventures. Poseidon was still angry at the hero, and Odysseus managed to appease him by going deep into mainland Greece and building a temple in a place where people had never seen the sea and did not know who Poseidon was. Other myths state that despite being married to Penelope, Odysseus went to Thesprotia. There, he married the local queen Callidice and defeated their enemies, the Brygians, in a large war. After that, he returned to Ithaca, while his son by Callidice, Polypoetes, became king of Thesprotia. However, Odysseus's end would come from an unexpected corner. While he was with Circe, Odysseus sired a son named Telegonos, who sailed off to find his father when he came of age. His tale is recorded in the fragmentary epic of the Telegoneia, and thus we know little about this myth. Eventually, Telegonos found Ithaca, but did not know that his father was there. Odysseus came to meet the stranger and got into an argument with him, whose reason is unknown to us. Using a poisoned spear, Telegonos struck Odysseus, who realized that this was his son as he drew his last breath. Telegonos also came to understand that he had murdered his own father and wept before his body. He, Telemachus, and Penelope took the corpse of Odysseus back to Aea, where it was buried. Circe made the three immortal, and then she proceeded to marry Telemachus, while Telegonos married Penelope, and thus the four lived on the magical island for the rest of eternity. The tale of Odysseus goes well beyond the Odyssey. From his birth to his death, the king of Ithaca was pulled into adventure after adventure. His curiosity and his cunning were truly unparalleled, as were flaws like arrogance evident in his character. This is the contradiction that defined many of the heroes of ancient Greece. Odysseus was motivated by many emotions during his adventures. His nostalgia for Ithaca in Aegisia, his quest for knowledge when facing the Sirens, or his desire for heroic glory when he set out as a youngster for mainland Hellas. All these emotions were drivers for many incredible adventures and many tragic events. Much like the Odyssey's roller coaster of emotions, our understanding of the hero himself is complex and often difficult. But, as with all Greek mythology, it is this difficulty that makes the life of Odysseus so rewarding to study. The return of the Greeks from Troy marked the end of the heroic age. The cities of Hellas, both old and new, had been profoundly impacted by the war's repercussions. New cities had been founded, dynasties had been upended, and the Olympian gods had decided the fate of thousands. For many Greeks, these stories took place during what we now know as the Bronze Age, a time when they believed their ancestors lived gloriously. But both Greece and its myths continued their journey through history. What should we remember from all these myths? In their various reinterpretations, Greek myths have given people the chance to express the spirit of their age, but they also give us lessons on how the Greeks saw the world of their own time. It is this tension, of the ancient and rigid, of the fluid and mutable, that makes Greek mythology so popular to this day. More videos on the vibrant world of ancient Greek myth are on the way, so make sure you're subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing. It helps immensely. Our videos wouldn't be possible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to learn our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.